Thanks so much for coming to May's Test of the Month Club. This month's theme is how we present ourselves to the world, and three fairly interesting studies on this from different realms of our nonprofit ecosystem. So the first is face-to-face fundraising. Yes, it's back. We're seeing both street and door, although I think door came back a little bit faster because it's a little bit easier to stand back on the step, those sorts of things. But for the most part, with very few exceptions, face-to-face fundraising is done by paid fundraisers. But as a donor, do we care if the canvasser is being paid? Usually this is something that occurs in the fine print. Is it something that we should be shouting about, in fact? So study looked at a door-to-door face-to-face campaign. They varied whether the person doing the canvassing was paid or unpaid. And they varied whether those people displayed their information or didn't display their information. So if you disclosed you wore a button that said, I'm a paid worker or I'm an unpaid volunteer. So think in your minds about what you think people are most likely to donate to. Okay, if you have that, let's go forward and see the results. The results, people actually donated more to the people who were paid to solicit, which that alone was a surprise for me. But then there's a significant, and I mean significant in the statistically significant sense of this, between males and females on the subject. So if you knew that the person answering the door was going to be female, you would absolutely display that you were paid. The mean donation there is $4.38. If you knew that person coming to the door was male, you would absolutely hide that, where they would donate $3.36 versus $2.33 for a woman who is being solicited by a paid solicitor but isn't displaying that fact. So on the flip side, if you're doing it with volunteers, you should, looking at people who disclose the information, females were also more likely to give to unpaid people when they disclosed, and males were more likely to give to unpaid people, although not significantly in this case, when it was not disclosed. Now, the trick is that you usually don't know who's going to answer the door. Unless you know it's a single person household. And so by and large, let's look at the gray bar here. You can see that the best state is if you disclose that information. So you'll get an average of, that's 45 cents more per, or in this, doing the math here, it's about 16% lift if you disclose that. So, 18%, I put it on the slide. Better than doing math in your head on the fly. So 18% better to disclose that information, but that's driven exclusively by women. Women always want the information, men never want the information, to the point that if you knew who was going to answer the door, you would change the script and take off or put on your button, but you don't know, so put on the button. The authors speculated as to why. They say that in the literature, there are gender differences on trusting behavior. Women are less trusting than men. So further disclosure helps women trust. My hypothesis is that there's a desire to reward someone in the community doing good work and not being paid much. But this is a result that really doesn't have a really great explanation, but is interesting. I can't explain the gender difference, but I think people want to know who's coming up to their door. That was my hypothesis coming in, and it turns out women want to know more than men do, whether the person's getting paid or not, or what situation they're in. So that's the first study. Feel free to shout out any questions in the chat or in the Q&A. Second one in how we present ourselves into the world is social proof. And there's a good Seinfeld bit about this with McDonald's and why do they talk about 99 billion served. Social proof is also your mother asking you, would you jump off the bridge if all of your friends thought they would jump off the bridge? And the answer to that is, well, if my friends have really good judgment and are safe, and I trust them in other things, they probably know something about, and so maybe, yeah, I would. But the social proof aspect of this, we're not entirely lemmings, but we have some lemming tendencies. Now the question is, so we know that when you put something in like your ask string to say most people donate this amount, you can increase your gift amount. People are more likely to buy Girl Scout cookies if there's a lot of people on the list. We tend to do what other people do. But what activates social proof better? What other people are doing or what other people are liking? So the difference is who join the people who get this monthly newsletter or the people who enjoy this monthly newsletter. Now, as someone who sends out a monthly newsletter, I know this is partly a lie. Not all of the people who subscribe to the monthly newsletter enjoy it, insofar as not all of them open it. Such is life. It's marketing after all. So my hypothesis was going into this study, actions speak louder than words. You know, what you do is more impactful than what you like. You'll also see that I tend to be an idiot. So see how these results go. So they asked folks their favorite chewing gum, and then fill out a survey about the flavor of that without tasting it, their preference, or after tasting it with consumption. And then the second person was asked to choose a flavor. And so the second person was less likely to choose the same flavor as subject one if they'd taken it after they'd consumed it. They wanted to know what their preference was rather than what they actually consumed. And this test went on for things like hangers and lamps and replicated this in other ways. And then they said to participants and say, these are popular food items, and describe them kind of like the email newsletter test. These are the ones that are most liked, or these are the ones that are most consumed. So consumed is the McDonald's model, preference is the Yelp model. What are people rating? And so looking at the purchase intention, and sure enough, people who heard more consumed, people recalled that information, but they were less likely to buy it in the future. So, and then the test one is they went into the real world, and they tested on Amazon and YouTube and looked at ratings versus sales, and they looked at YouTube likes versus views. And consistent with the other tests, that when you had preference data and you had consumption data, the things that people liked and rated highly was more important than the things that people bought or viewed. And so all in all, the winner, McDonald's, can replace their 99 billion served with their Yelp reviews. This one's 2-star. McDonald's doesn't offer fine dining, but I also don't know if your expectations are going to be significantly not met by generally McDonald's. So I'm surprised to see 2 stars there. So liking, the people who enjoy this monthly newsletter, even though it's a little bit of a white lie, will activate social proof better. So there's a third one in how we present ourselves to the world. That's a little bit depressing, but it does go to a lot of what we've been talking about with TNPA in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion. This is a bit of the uphill battle that we fight. So you're probably familiar with the site Kiva that does individual loans to help people. They're able to go online and request a loan for starting up their own business. Most of those loans are then paid back, and the loaner can then pay that forward to someone else or choose to keep that money. But the idea is that a lot of folks throughout the world have these ideas for businesses and have just need the startup capital to be able to get them going. And that can happen at a coffee shop, or that can happen for artisanal goods all the way around the world. So researchers went in with Kiva's permission to say, does what the borrower looks like impact giving? And so they first had people assess who's doing the asking. So people went in and rated attractiveness and physique in terms of how heavy the person was, what their skin color was the person smiling? And then they also said, how needy is this person? How trustworthy is this person? How creditworthy is this person? And so then they, separate from that, said, how does that impact, these things impact whether people meet their goals, whether they're able to do fundraising, how much money do they get? And this is the depressing part. Those people who were one standard deviation more attractive took 11% shorter to get full funding. So people gave to those people faster. Those who were one standard deviation heavier had a 12% longer time to get full funding. Those who had a skin color one standard deviation darker had an 8% longer time to get full funding. And for perspective, those who had asked for $10 more had a 13% longer time to get full funding. So if you are less attractive, heavier, and darker, one standard deviation on each of those, it's the equivalent of asking for 25 to 30% more on your funding in terms of how long it will take to achieve that. So putting it in our terms, that's probably a 20% drop in revenue, one standard deviation out on each of those. So this gives us a significant challenge as we try to do efforts around donor centricity. I'm a big fan of sites like Kiva. I think they fill a great void in the world and help people fund their dreams. But there are obviously these systemic issues about who the donor is, who the recipient is, and how they're funded. And if there's 100% ability to direct gifts, restrict gifts, those sorts of things, in a true, like 100% donor-centered environment, you are going to reinforce some of these structural inequities. So some of these caveats, I do want to say that we're reporting this, we're not justifying this. This is where we are now. It's not where we want things to be. And so we're all working to change these kind of ingrained biases. I don't recommend changing your photos or who's doing the asking or those sorts of things on this. Rather, I would say this is something to think about as we talk about how donors select where their gifts go. And part of the advantage that nonprofits like ours have over one person asking for one gift for one thing, because an organization is able to take in these revenues and then fund based on need rather than who the person is or what they look like, or at least we should be. So, questions? Again, put those in the chat and in the Q&A, and while we're asking for some of those questions, we are always looking for live tests, organizations that are willing to share a test. How did those labels do? What subject lines are working best for you? I tried my newsletter without images, and here are the results. All of those sorts of things are great to hear because they're from what comes from the community. So if you have one of those things and would like to share it, my email address is nellinger@mooredmgroup.com. That's MOOREDM group.com. Also, please let me know if you have ideas for future sessions, questions that you've always wanted answered, things that you'd like brought up before the group. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Oh, on the Kiva test, could they tell the average age of donors? Wonder if people gave differently to people based on race, gender, etc. I'm sorry, I don't recall that exactly. My guess is that they would tend to skew younger because digital donors tend to skew younger. And we also know that that people who use crowdfunding sites also skew younger. So if I had to guess, it'd be in the younger being me, not younger being a younger millennial or something along those lines. But that would be my guess. And then asking if people gave differently to people based on their own race, gender, etc. That is definitely a limitation of the study. They did not have insights into the donor's behavior. There is some good literature that people are more likely to give to in-groups. So I have a request for my email address, so I'm going to put that in. Okay. People tend to give to their in-groups more than to out-groups. So a group that you belong to, you're more likely to give to, which would mean that people are more likely to give to people of their own race. I know there's another study on Kiva that because the bulk of their donors are from North America, a North American project is about 95% more likely to be funded than a project in Asia. So there's definitely in-group, out-group bias based on the some additional Kiva data. That said, it wouldn't necessarily explain the attractiveness and weight findings that we have here. Not all of the people who are donating are beautiful. Not all of them are skinny, which would be the things that would be rewarded. Rather, that seems to be a factor of inherent liking. There's also some study. So how do you break down these sorts of barriers of in-group, out-group bias? Because we're looking to tell a diverse set of stories to a diverse set of donors. One thing is not, one opportunity is not to mention it. So there was a study in Greece, there is heavy prejudice against gypsy populations. Romani populations. I think they referred to them as gypsy in the copy. And when you said it was a gypsy child or a Romani child, the response rate dropped 50% versus if it was a Greek child. The study also found that if you took away any descriptor of the child, if you just said a child is in need, then it went back up to the same as if it were a Greek child. And so there was a discrimination in this test against Romani, but removing the descriptors can be a solution. Another solution, and I've written about this on the TNPA blog, so I'd suggest going there because I'm going kind of off the top of my head here. Another solution to this is to kind of look at the intersections of identity and find a way that you do relate to a person. So if someone is a parent and the person that they're giving to is a parent, if you can activate the parent identity for the person, you can say, oh yes, I'm just like this person. You know, I worry when my kid goes out at night, just like this person halfway across the world. Similarly, I know there are some in religious circles who refer to people of the book, which is a nice way of saying religious people, but not necessarily this is a person who's a Muslim, you're a Christian, but we're all people of the book. And that type of shared identity is a way of reframing some of the differences. Then we have a question for a social proof on a donation form. Do you have any suggestions about how you'd use that enjoy example here? I'm thinking more of what might encourage people to choose monthly giving, not choose a particular amount. I would actually say it's probably easier to do with monthly giving than to give a particular amount. With a particular amount, you're kind of limited to most people give this amount, most people do this sorts of things. What I'm thinking for monthly giving is if you have a set of benefits or a descriptor of some of the things that you get as a result of a monthly giver, becoming a monthly giver. And these don't necessarily have to be premiums. These can be our email newsletter. I'm guessing that most organizations, if there's a monthly giving club or society, has those types of inclusion benefits, benefits of being part of this group. Or if there's a named, so you can say this many people or most people enjoy getting these types of benefits. So that would be one way of doing it. The other, even if you don't have benefits, if you have a named giving society, you can say this many people today enjoyed joining up for the Martin Luther King Society or whatever that group is for your group. It is a little bit harder to do on a donation level than on things like a newsletter where it's more experiential, but those are a couple of ways I might try it. And then for those who are interested to talk about tests, either things that you want to see or things that you would be willing to present or share, my email address is in the chat. For those watching the archived version of this, it's nellinger, that's ELLINGER, at mooredmgroup.com. Thank you so much for your time today. Shout out with any questions you have or things that you'd like to present in the future. Thank you very much.